The Mafia boss brought his son to the beach hoping for one normal day. She was just a teacher who happened to know sign language and saw a lonely child who needed someone to talk to. One conversation changed everything. Now she's the only person who can reach his son, the only one he trusts. And in his world, that makes her both precious and targeted. Lorenzo Vitali wasn't the kind of man who went to public beaches. He owned a private island off the coast of Michigan, 3 penthouse suites with lake views, and enough power in Chicago to make politicians sweat. But his 8-year-old son Marco had pointed to a faded photograph that morning, a picture of his mother building sandcastles with him years ago at this exact beach, and Lorenzo couldn't say no. Not anymore. Not after 18 months of silence. "Stay close," Lorenzo muttered to his lead security man, Vincent, as they crossed the hot sand. "But not too close. I want him to feel normal." Vincent nodded, disappearing into the crowd with 3 other men who'd blend in as joggers, fishermen, and tourists. Lorenzo knew they'd form a perimeter within 30 seconds. He'd been doing this long enough to know the drill. Marco walked beside him, small hand gripping his father's wrist. The boy hadn't spoken since the car accident that killed his mother. Doctors said there was no physical damage to his vocal cords. The silence was something else. Something deeper. Lorenzo spread out a blue blanket near the water and sat down heavily. Marco immediately crouched at the edge, fingers tracing patterns in the wet sand. His lips moved sometimes, like he was talking to someone only he could see. Lorenzo's chest tightened watching him. "You hungry, buddy?" Lorenzo asked, knowing there'd be no answer. Marco didn't look up. 50 feet away, Sophie Martinez was wrestling with a beach umbrella that refused to stay planted in the sand. Her 7-year-old son Eli was already sprinting toward the water, and she was fairly certain she'd forgotten to pack his allergy medication. "Eli, wait for me to set this up," she called, giving the umbrella one final shove. "Mom, come on," Eli shouted back, waving frantically. Sophie laughed, grabbing the sunscreen, and jogged after him. She'd been working double shifts at the diner for 3 months to afford this day off. They'd eat sandwiches she made at home, stay until sunset, and Eli would sleep the whole drive back to their tiny apartment. It was perfect. That's when she saw the boy. He was crouched near the shoreline, hands moving in deliberate patterns. Not playing. Not splashing. Signing. Sophie stopped mid-step, her teacher instincts firing. She'd spent 6 years working at the Brightside Learning Center before budget cuts eliminated her position. She knew those gestures. Water. Cold. Pretty. The boy was alone, talking to himself in sign language. Sophie glanced around and spotted a man in an expensive black polo watching the boy from a blanket nearby. The man's jaw was tight, his posture rigid. There was something about him, the way he held himself, the intensity in his eyes, that made Sophie hesitate. But the boy signed again, alone. Always alone. That did it. "Eli, stay where I can see you," Sophie called, then walked toward the signing boy. She crouched down a few feet away and lifted her hands. "Hi. I'm Sophie. What's your name?" The boy's head snapped up, eyes wide. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then slowly his hands moved. "Marco." "Nice to meet you, Marco. Are you here with your dad?" Marco nodded, glancing back at Lorenzo. Sophie followed his gaze and felt a chill despite the summer heat. The man was watching them now with an intensity that made her want to stand up and walk away. But Marco was signing again. "He doesn't understand me." "Not like you do." Sophie's heart broke a little. She'd seen this before, parents who loved their kids but didn't know how to bridge the gap when words disappeared. "He loves you. I can tell." "How?" "Because he brought you here. Because he's watching you to make sure you're safe. That's what love looks like." Marco's hands paused. Then, he did something Sophie didn't expect. He smiled. And then, impossibly, he laughed. It was small, more like a breath than a sound, but it was there. Lorenzo was on his feet instantly. He'd seen his son's face light up in a way it hadn't since before the accident. This stranger, this woman with sun-streaked brown hair and worn sneakers, had made his son laugh. In 30 seconds, she'd done what doctors, therapists, and Lorenzo himself had failed to do in over a year. Vincent materialized at his elbow. "Boss, you want me to?" "No," Lorenzo said quietly. "Let it play out." He walked closer, slowly, not wanting to break whatever spell had been cast. Sophie saw him coming and stood, brushing sand from her knees. Up close, he was even more intimidating, 6'2", dark hair graying at the temples, eyes that looked like they'd seen things she didn't want to imagine. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just saw him signing and I—" "You know sign language," Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. "I used to teach kids with special needs. I learned it for work." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "He doesn't talk. Hasn't in 18 months. "I know," Sophie said softly. "But he's saying a lot. You just have to know how to listen." Marco tugged on Sophie's sleeve. She looked down and he signed, "Can I play with your son?" Sophie glanced at Eli, who was watching curiously from the water's edge. "Of course. His name is Eli." Marco ran toward Eli, and within seconds, they were digging in the sand together. Eli talked constantly, narrating their castle building, and Marco responded with quick hand movements that Eli didn't understand but seemed delighted by anyway. Lorenzo stood there, speechless. "He's a good kid," Sophie said. "He just needs someone who speaks his language." "What's your name?" Lorenzo asked. "Sophie Martinez." Something passed over Lorenzo's face, recognition, maybe, or surprise, but it vanished before Sophie could identify it. "Thank you," he said finally. The words seemed to cost him something. Sophie nodded and started to walk back to her umbrella, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted. She glanced back once and saw Lorenzo watching his son with an expression she recognized. Hope. What she didn't see was the man on the pier with a camera, or the ice cream vendor who wasn't selling any ice cream, or the way Vincent had already spotted both and was quietly speaking into his wrist. The day had started so simply. It wouldn't end that way. Alex Carter adjusted his telephoto lens, tracking the man in the black polo across the crowded beach. 17 months of surveillance, and this was the first time Lorenzo Vitali had set foot in a public space without a full security convoy. Alex had almost missed it. His informant's tip had come in at 6 a.m., barely giving him time to grab his gear and set up on the pier disguised as a tourist photographer. "Come on, give me something," Alex muttered, snapping photos of Vincent and the other security personnel trying to blend in. They were good, but not good enough. He'd ID'd 3 already. Then his lens found something unexpected. A woman was crouching next to the kid, Lorenzo's son. They were using sign language, hands moving in animated conversation. The boy was smiling. Actually smiling. Alex zoomed in, capturing the woman's face. Mid-30s, brown hair pulled back, worn clothes. She didn't fit the profile of Lorenzo's usual associates. His pulse quickened when Lorenzo approached her. They talked. The woman's son joined Lorenzo's kid, and suddenly the two boys were playing like old friends while the adults watched. "Who are you?" Alex whispered, clicking rapid-fire shots. The woman's body language was all wrong for a business meeting. She seemed nervous, but not scared. Familiar, but not intimate. Lorenzo thanked her. Alex could read his lips, and she walked away. New associate? New girlfriend? Leverage. Alex flagged the photos for facial recognition and kept shooting. Whatever this was, it mattered. Lorenzo Vitali didn't bring his son to public beaches and let strangers get close without a reason. Sophie tried to focus on Eli, but her eyes kept drifting back to Marco. She'd recognized him the moment she saw his face up close. It had taken her a second because he was older now, taller, but those eyes were unmistakable. She taught him for 3 months at Brightside before the accident. Before everything fell apart. The Brightside Learning Center had been funded by a generous anonymous donor who'd paid for everything: specialized equipment, teacher salaries, building renovations. Sophie had never known the donor's name, but she'd known the woman who arranged everything: Maria Vitali, a quiet, elegant woman who'd visited often, always asking about the children's progress. Always asking about Marco. When Maria died in the accident, the funding disappeared. The center closed 6 months later, and Sophie had been scrambling for work ever since. She'd never connected the dots until now. Never realized the donor had been Lorenzo Vitali, or that Maria had been his wife. The Mafia boss with blood on his hands had paid her salary to help kids like his son. Sophie's stomach twisted. She should grab Eli and leave right now. She should run far away from whatever this was. But when she looked at Marco, signing happily to Eli, who responded with enthusiastic gibberish, her feet wouldn't move. "Mom, Marco wants to know if we have extra buckets," Eli shouted, running up with sand caked to his shins. "In the bag, baby," Sophie said, forcing a smile. Marco followed Eli over, more cautious. He looked up at Sophie and signed. "Thank you for talking to me." "Anytime," Sophie signed back. "Do you remember me?" Marco's hands moved slowly, uncertain. From before. Sophie's breath caught. He recognized her too. She glanced at Lorenzo, who was speaking quietly with one of his men, then crouched to Marco's level. "Yes. I remember. You were very brave back then." "I'm not brave anymore." "Yes, you are. You're here, aren't you? You're trying." Marco looked away, toward the water. "My mom liked this beach." "I know. She told me about it." His head snapped back to her, eyes wide. "You knew my mom?" Sophie nodded, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down. "She was very kind. She loved you so much." Marco's face crumpled, and for a terrible moment, Sophie thought he might cry. Instead, he signed, "My dad doesn't talk about her. It makes him too sad." Sometimes grown-ups don't know how to talk about sad things. It doesn't mean they don't feel them. Marco considered this, then signed, "Can you teach him? Like you taught me." Sophie's throat tightened. "I don't know if that's a good idea, sweetheart." But Marco was already running back to his father, pulling on his hand, pointing at Sophie, with excited gestures. Lorenzo's expression shifted from confusion to surprise as he watched his son's hands. He looked at Sophie with new understanding and new questions. From the pier, Alex watched the exchange with growing interest. The woman knew the kid. She'd known him before today. This wasn't a chance meeting, it was a reunion. He zoomed in on Lorenzo's face and caught something he'd never seen in 17 months of surveillance: vulnerability. The crime boss looked almost human, watching his son communicate with this woman. Alex's phone buzzed. Facial recognition had a hit. Sophie Martinez. Age 34. Former special education teacher. Currently employed at Jerry's Diner on West Madison. No criminal record. No known associates with organized crime. Clean. Completely clean. Which meant either she was genuinely innocent and had stumbled into Lorenzo's orbit by accident, or she was deep enough undercover that even federal databases hadn't flagged her. Alex didn't believe in coincidences. He adjusted his position, making sure to capture every interaction. If Sophie Martinez was about to become part of Lorenzo Vitali's inner circle, the FBI needed to know everything about her. What he didn't notice was the ice cream vendor 40 feet below him, speaking into a phone in rapid Italian, or the way the vendor's eyes kept flicking between Lorenzo's son and the pier. 3 different people were watching the same beach for 3 different reasons. And only one of them had seen the 4th player, the one who didn't belong. 3 blocks away, in a rusted Ford pickup, Tony Castellano lowered his binoculars and smiled. "I'll be damned," he said, passing the binoculars to his brother Ricky. "Lorenzo Vitali at a public beach with 4, count them, 4 guards. He really thinks his kid needs fresh air more than protection." Ricky peered through the lenses, focusing on Lorenzo's position near the water. "That's the most relaxed I've seen his setup in 2 years." He's getting soft. Grief does that, Tony said, lighting a cigarette. Makes you sloppy. Makes you think about sandcastles instead of survival. The Castellanos had been circling Lorenzo's territory for years, waiting for an opening. Lorenzo controlled the north side docks, the shipping routes, the union connections that made Chicago's underbelly run smooth. But he was too careful, too protected. His operation was a fortress with no cracks. Until Maria died. Since then, Lorenzo had been distracted. Less aggressive. He'd passed on 3 lucrative opportunities, turned down expansion deals, pulled back from the streets. The other families had noticed. Whispers were starting, whispers that Lorenzo Vitali was losing his edge. Tony planned to prove them right. "What are you thinking?" Ricky asked, though he already knew. He'd seen that look before. "I'm thinking we don't get many chances like this," Tony said slowly. "Open space. Divided attention. And if we play it smart, we don't even need to get violent. You want to take the kid? I want leverage." Tony flicked Ash out the window. "We take the boy nice and clean. No shooting, no screaming. Just 2 men and a balloon vendor making a kid's day. By the time Lorenzo realizes what's happening, we're gone." Ricky shifted uncomfortably. Taking a kid's one thing. Taking Lorenzo's kid? That's asking for war. "War's coming anyway," Tony said. "At least this way. We control the terms. We hold Marco for 48 hours, Lorenzo signs over the docks, and everyone goes home happy. Well, everyone except Lorenzo. And if he doesn't sign?" Tony's smile faded. "Then we make sure the boy doesn't come back. But it won't come to that. Lorenzo's not the same man he was before the accident. He'll choose his son over business." Ricky studied his brother's face, looking for the angle he was missing. What about the woman? The one talking to the kid? Tony hadn't thought about her. He raised the binoculars again, focusing on Sophie as she organized buckets and shovels for the boys. Probably nobody. A tourist who knows sign language. Lorenzo doesn't let nobody get near his kid. Which means she's useful, Tony decided. We use her too. Make it look natural. Kids follow balloons, mothers follow kids. If she gets caught in the middle, Lorenzo's men will hesitate. They won't risk shooting with her in the crossfire. Ricky nodded slowly. It was cold, but it made sense. "So, how do we do this?" Tony pulled out his phone and dialed. "Sal?" "Yeah, it's me. You still got that balloon card in storage?" "Good. I need you at Montrose Beach in 30 minutes. And bring Danny. I need someone who looks friendly." He hung up and turned to Ricky. "Here's the play. You take the ice cream cart position like you've been doing. Keep eyes on Vincent and the other guards. The second you see an opening, you text me. Meanwhile, Sal sets up the balloon cart near the pier, far enough from Lorenzo that he won't feel threatened, close enough that the kids will notice. And Danny. Danny plays the friendly vendor. Gets the boys excited about free balloons. Maybe mentions there's a special prize at the cart, some toy or game. Kids love that stuff. They follow him to the pier, and that's where we move. For guards, Tony. Even if they're spread out. They won't be watching the pier, Tony interrupted. They'll be watching Lorenzo. That's the blind spot. We pull this off in under 90 seconds, grab the boys, into the van on the other side of the pier, gone before anyone processes what happened. Ricky's jaw tightened. Both boys? You're taking the woman's kid too? Complications create cover, Tony said. If we only take Marco, everyone knows immediately it's about Lorenzo. We take both boys, it looks random. Could be a kidnapping, could be human trafficking, could be anything. Buys us time before Lorenzo figures out who did it. That's cold, even for you. That's smart, Tony corrected. The other kid comes back unharmed in 24 hours. We're not monsters, we're businessmen. Ricky looked back at the beach, watching Marco and Eli build their sandcastle, unaware that their afternoon had just become currency in a war they didn't understand. 30 minutes, Tony said, starting the engine. Let's get in position. At the beach, Sophie was spreading sunscreen on Eli's shoulders when Marco signed to her. My dad wants to know if you'll have lunch with us. Sophie looked over at Lorenzo, who stood 20 feet away, hands in his pockets. He wasn't smiling, but there was something almost hopeful in his expression. "I don't know, Marco," she started. "Please," Marco signed. "I don't want you to leave yet." Eli piped up. "Can we, Mom? Marco's teaching me hand words." Sophie glanced at her watch. They had 3 more hours before she needed to be back for her evening shift. What could it hurt? Marco was happy, Eli was having fun, and Lorenzo seemed human. Less dangerous up close. "Okay," she said. "Lunch sounds nice." Marco's face lit up, and he ran to tell his father. Sophie gathered their things, not noticing the ice cream vendor who'd repositioned himself closer to her umbrella, or the white van that had just parked illegally near the pier entrance. She didn't see the balloon cart being wheeled into place. She only saw Marco, signing excitedly to his father, and Lorenzo's rare smile in response. By the time she noticed the danger, it would already be too late. Vincent didn't trust coincidences. 23 years working for Lorenzo Vitali had taught him that when something seemed too perfect, it usually was. And this woman, Sophie Martinez, was too perfect. She appeared at exactly the right moment, knew exactly what Marco needed, and now Lorenzo was inviting her to lunch like they were old friends. Vincent had watched men die for less suspicious behavior. He pulled Lorenzo aside while Sophie gathered her things. "Boss, we need to talk." Lorenzo's expression hardened. "Not now, Vincent." "Now," Vincent insisted, lowering his voice. "This woman shows up out of nowhere, happens to know sign language, happens to make your son laugh for the first time in 18 months? You don't think that's convenient? She's a teacher. Former teacher. It makes sense. Or it's a setup." Vincent's jaw tightened. "The Castellanos have been quiet lately. Too quiet. What if they sent her? Get close to Marco. Gain your trust then." "Then what?" Lorenzo interrupted. "She teaches him? Plays with him? That's not how the Castellanos operate. Maybe they're getting smarter." Vincent gestured toward Sophie. "I'm telling you, boss, something's off. Let me ask her a few questions. Politely. Just to be sure." Lorenzo watched Sophie help Eli pack their beach toys, her movements easy and natural. She didn't look like a plant. She looked like a tired single mother trying to give her kid a good day. But Vincent was right about one thing. Lorenzo hadn't survived this long by being trusting. 5 minutes, Lorenzo said finally.
"And Vincent? She's not a suspect. She's a guest.
Treat her like 1 inch." Vincent nodded and approached Sophie, with 2 other guards flanking him at a distance. His smile was professional, but didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Martinez? Mind if we chat for a moment?" Sophie looked up, and her stomach dropped. The friendly atmosphere had evaporated. These men weren't making small talk. "Is something wrong?" she asked, glancing toward Lorenzo, who stood watching with an unreadable expression. "Just routine questions," Vincent said smoothly. "How about we step over here, away from the kids?" It wasn't really a question. Sophie's hands trembled as she followed Vincent toward a cluster of palm trees 20 yards from where the boys were playing. Eli waved at her, oblivious. Marco watched with worried eyes. "I didn't do anything wrong," Sophie said quietly. "I was just being friendly." "I'm sure you were," Vincent replied. "Tell me, how did you know Marco uses sign language?" "I saw him signing to himself." "From how far away?" Sophie blinked. "I don't know. 50 feet. "That's pretty observant." Vincent's tone was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "What exactly did you see him sign?" He was talking about the water. And being alone. Specific vocabulary for a casual observer. "I told you, I'm a teacher. I know sign language." "Former teacher," Vincent corrected. "You work at Jerry's Diner now. Why'd you leave teaching?" Sophie's face flushed. "The center I worked at closed. Budget cuts." "Which center?" "Brightside Learning Center." Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. He knew that name. "When did it close?" "About a year ago." "Interesting timing." Sophie's patience snapped. "Look, I don't know what you think I did, but I was just trying to be nice to a kid who looked lonely. That's it. If Mr. Vitali has a problem with that, he can tell me himself. Vincent studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Stay here. I'll be right back. He walked back toward Lorenzo, leaving Sophie standing with the two other guards. She felt trapped, exposed. This was exactly why she should have walked away the moment she recognized Marco. 50 yards away, Danny Flores pushed his balloon cart closer to where Marco and Eli were building their sandcastle. Check it out, kids, he called cheerfully, his voice carrying over the beach noise. Special promotion today, free balloons and prizes for the first 10 kids to visit my cart. Eli's head popped up immediately. Mom, can we? He looked around and realized his mother wasn't there. Marco, where'd they go? Marco pointed toward the palm trees where Sophie stood with Vincent's men. His hands moved. They're talking to her. Should we wait?
Eli asked.
Before Marco could respond, Danny approached with a huge smile and an armful of colorful balloons. Hey there, boys. You two look like you could use some balloons. What's your favorite color? Blue. Eli shouted immediately. Danny handed him a blue balloon, then looked at Marco. How about you, buddy? Marco hesitated, glancing back toward his father. Lorenzo was talking with Vincent, both men focused on their conversation. I'll tell you what, Danny said, crouching down conspiratorially. I've got special prize balloons in my cart over by the pier. They've got toys inside, action figures, games, really cool stuff. But I'm running out fast. You boys should grab yours before they're gone. Eli's eyes widened. Can we, Marco? Please. Marco looked uncertain. His father had told him to stay close. But the pier wasn't that far, and the balloon man seemed nice. The man smiled like his mother used to, warm and safe. Okay, Marco signed. But we come right back. Cross my heart, Danny said, making an exaggerated X over his chest. 2 minutes, tops. Your folks won't even notice you're gone. He started walking toward the pier, balloons bobbing above his head. Eli followed immediately, and after a moment's hesitation, Marco did too. From the pier, Alex Carter watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. Through his lens, he'd seen Vincent pull Sophie aside. He'd watched Lorenzo approve the questioning. Standard Mafia paranoia, they were vetting her, making sure she wasn't a threat. But then his lens caught something else. 2 boys walking away from Lorenzo's position, following a balloon vendor. One of them was Marco Vitali. The other was Sophie's son. Alex zoomed in on the vendor's face, snapping rapid photos. Something about the man's body language was wrong. He wasn't looking at the kids with friendly interest. He was scanning the beach, checking sight lines, moving with purpose. Alex shifted his camera to Lorenzo and Vincent, still deep in conversation. Neither had noticed the boys leaving. He swung back to Sophie, who was arguing with one of the guards, trying to see around him to where she'd left Eli. Come on, lady, turn around, Alex muttered. See your kid walking away. But Sophie was blocked by 2 guards, and Lorenzo was distracted by Vincent's concerns. The balloon vendor was leading both boys toward the pier, toward the parking lot, toward the white van Alex had noted earlier, but dismissed as tourists. Every instinct Alex had developed in 12 years with the FBI started screaming. This wasn't a mafia operation. This was an abduction in progress. And he had maybe 60 seconds to decide whether to blow 18 months of deep cover to stop it. Sophie pushed past the guard's outstretched arm. I don't care what you think, she said sharply. I need to see my son.
Now.
The guard moved to block her again, but Sophie had spent 6 years managing classrooms full of kids with behavioral challenges. She knew how to command presence when it mattered. Move, she said, her voice dropping to something cold and final. Or I start screaming that you're holding me against my will. Let's see how fast this beach clears out and how many cell phones start recording. The guard's eyes widened slightly. He glanced at his partner, uncertain. Sophie didn't wait for permission. She ducked around him and ran toward where she'd left Eli and Marco, her heart hammering. The sandcastle was abandoned. 2 buckets lay on their sides, forgotten. Eli, she shouted, spinning in a circle. Eli. Her eyes scanned the beach frantically. The water, the blankets, the volleyball nets. Where was he? Where was Marco? Then she saw them. Two small figures walking toward the pier, following a man with balloons. Even from a distance, she recognized Eli's bright orange swim trunks and Marco's white t-shirt. Behind them, partially hidden by the pier support beams, she caught movement. Another man. Watching. Waiting. Every maternal instinct Sophie possessed began screaming. She ran for higher ground, climbing onto a concrete barrier that separated the beach from the boardwalk. From there, she had a clear view of both boys, now 50 feet from the pier entrance. Marco was walking slower than Eli, his head turning back toward the beach. He looked uncertain.
Good.
Use that uncertainty. Sophie raised her hands and signed as large and clear as she could, praying Marco would look her direction. Marco. Nothing. He was too far, too distracted. She tried again, bigger, more emphatic. Marco. Look at me. Marco's head turned. He scanned the beach, confused. Then his eyes found Sophie on the barrier. Sophie's hands moved in sharp, unmistakable gestures. Stop. Danger. Man bad. Come back now. Marco froze mid-step. The balloon vendor noticed immediately and turned, his friendly expression evaporating into something harder. Come on, boys, just a little farther. But Marco had already grabbed Eli's arm, pulling him backward. Hey, what's wrong? Eli asked, confused. Marco's hands flew. My friend says danger. We go back. But the prizes.
Now.
The vendor's hand shot out, reaching for Marco's shoulder. Look, kid, don't be scared. Marco twisted away with surprising speed, pulling Eli with him. The two boys broke into a run back toward the beach. The vendor swore under his breath and spoke into his wrist. Tony, we got a problem. The kid bolted. From the pier above, Alex Carter had watched the entire sequence unfold. He'd seen Sophie break away from the guards. He'd seen her climb the barrier and sign to the boy. He'd seen the precise moment Marco understood and ran. And now he saw something else, a second man emerging from behind the pier's north support, moving to intercept the boys. This one wasn't pretending to be friendly. This one had a gun poorly concealed under his jacket. Alex's mind raced through the math. If he intervened, his cover was blown. 18 months of surveillance, thousands of hours of work, a federal case that could bring down Lorenzo Vitale's entire operation, all of it gone. But if he didn't intervene, those kids would disappear into a van and whatever happened next would be on him. 2 children. 2 lives. Against 18 months of his career. Damn it, Alex whispered. He jumped down from his elevated position and moved quickly along the pier, his camera still around his neck, playing the role of confused tourist. The second man, Ricky Castellano, though Alex didn't know his name yet, was closing in on the boys from their left flank. Alex positioned himself in Ricky's path, fumbling with his camera like he was trying to change settings. Excuse me, sir? Alex called, his voice loud and friendly. Could you help me? I'm trying to get a good shot of the lighthouse, but I can't figure out this zoom. Ricky tried to sidestep him, but Alex moved with him, staying in his way. Sorry, I'm just so confused by this thing, Alex continued, deliberately blocking the path. Get out of my way, Ricky growled. Oh, are you in a hurry? My apologies. Alex stepped aside but accidentally dropped his camera lens cap, which rolled directly into Ricky's path. Ricky kicked it aside and pushed past, but the delay had cost him crucial seconds. Marco and Eli had reached Sophie, who jumped down from the barrier and was now crouching between them and the pier, her arms spread protectively. Alex kept his camera raised, snapping photos as if he were just a tourist capturing beach scenes. But his lens was focused on Ricky's face, the balloon vendor who'd tried to lure the boys, and the white vent partially visible in the parking lot. His phone was in his pocket, recording everything. Cover blown or not, he'd have evidence. Vincent saw Marco running and immediately understood something was wrong. "Boss," he barked, pointing. Lorenzo's head snapped up. His son was sprinting across the beach toward Sophie, who was positioning herself between the boys and two men Vincent didn't recognize. Lorenzo's hand went to his waist, where he kept a compact Glock on beach days. "Get Marco."
Now.
Vincent and the other guards moved instantly, closing the distance in seconds. But Lorenzo was faster, driven by something Vincent had never seen in him before: pure, undiluted fear. Not for himself, for his son. From the pickup truck 3 blocks away, Tony Castellano watched his carefully planned operation fall apart in real time. "Abort," he said into his phone. "Ricky, Danny, get out of there."
Now.
"But we're so close." "I said abort." Tony slammed his hand against the dashboard. "Vitali's moving, his guards are moving, and there's too many witnesses. Get in the van and go." He watched through his binoculars as Lorenzo Vitali ran across the beach toward his son, moving faster than a man his age should move, his face twisted with something between rage and terror. Tony had miscalculated. Lorenzo Vitali wasn't soft. He'd just been waiting for someone to threaten the one thing he still loved. "Pull back," Tony said quietly. "We'll try again another day." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. They'd shown their hand. And Lorenzo Vitali never forgave threats against his family. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ricky Castellano ignored his brother's order. He'd come too far, gotten too close to walk away empty-handed. Tony might be willing to retreat, but Tony wasn't the one standing 15 feet from a payday that could change their entire operation. "Danny, keep moving," Ricky hissed into his wrist. "I'm going in." He pulled his jacket tighter over his concealed weapon and strode towards Sophie and the boys with renewed purpose. The woman was protecting them, arms spread wide like a mama bear, but she was just one person. One grab, one quick movement, and he'd have at least one of the kids. Sophie saw him coming and her blood turned to ice. The man wasn't pretending anymore. His face was hard, determined, and he was moving too fast for casual interest. She backed up, pushing both boys behind her. "Eli, Marco, run toward the big man in the black shirt," she said quietly, keeping her eyes on Ricky. "Run now, Mom."
Now.
Lorenzo saw the threat the same moment Vincent did. A man in a gray jacket moving toward his son with predatory intent. Another man with balloons circling around from the opposite side. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. Vincent left flank.
Carlos, right.
"Michael, get the van ready," Lorenzo ordered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. 20 years of surviving Chicago's underworld had taught him to think clearly in crisis. His guards moved like a well-oiled machine, spreading out to create a perimeter. Vincent's hand moved to his concealed holster. Carlos spoke quickly into his phone, calling for backup. Lorenzo himself moved straight toward Marco, covering ground in long strides. His eyes never left his son. The beach's atmosphere shifted in an instant. Families nearby sensed the change in energy, the purposeful movements, the grim faces, the way several large men were suddenly converging on one spot. People began gathering their things, creating distance. Alex Carter felt the moment, everything accelerated. The man he delayed, Ricky, based on the facial recognition now pinging on his phone, was moving again, faster this time, desperation replacing caution. The balloon vendor had circled around, trying to flank Sophie and the boys from the other direction. And Lorenzo's security team was responding like a military unit. 3 different forces, all converging on 2 terrified children. Alex made his choice. He moved down from the pier, no longer pretending to be a confused tourist. His hand stayed visible, his body language non-threatening, but he positioned himself directly in Danny's path. "I don't think the kids want balloons anymore, friend," Alex said quietly. Danny's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you. Those kids look scared. That concerns me. Walk away." "Can't do that." Behind them, Alex could hear running footsteps, Lorenzo's men getting closer. Ricky was 20 feet from Sophie. Marco and Eli had started running but were moving too slowly, stumbling in the sand. Everything was happening at once. Sophie's heart hammered as she watched the gray-jacketed man close the distance. Behind her, she could hear Marco's panicked breathing and Eli calling for her. "Stay behind me," she shouted, moving to keep herself between the children and their pursuer. Ricky's hand moved toward his jacket, and Sophie's mind flashed to every news story she'd ever seen about beach abductions, trafficking rings, children who disappeared and never came home. Not today. Not her son. Not Marco. She grabbed a plastic beach shovel from the sand and held it like a weapon, knowing how absurd it was and not caring. You touch them, and I start screaming. Every phone on this beach will be recording you. Lady, you don't know what you're in the middle of. I know enough. Ricky's jaw clenched. He could take her. She wasn't that big, wasn't that strong, but she was right about the phones. Already, several people were watching, a few holding up their devices. He hesitated. That hesitation cost him everything. Vincent reached them first, moving in from Ricky's blind side. "Step away from them," Vincent said, his voice cold and professional. His jacket was open now, revealing the shoulder holster beneath. Last warning. Ricky's hand froze halfway to his own weapon. He recognized the setup: professional security, military bearing, the kind of men who shot first and justified it later. "This isn't over," Ricky said, backing up slowly. "Yeah," Vincent replied. "It is." On the other side, Carlos had intercepted Danny, physically blocking his path to the children. Danny's friendly vendor mask had completely dissolved. He looked between Carlos's massive frame and the security team forming around Lorenzo, calculating odds he didn't like. "Tony, we need backup," Danny said into his wrist. "Vitali's got a full team here." "No backup," Tony's voice crackled back, tight with fury. "Get out. Both of you.
Now."
Alex watched the standoff from 10 feet away, his camera still recording. Lorenzo Vitali's men had created a defensive perimeter around Sophie and the two boys. The would-be kidnappers were backing off, hands visible, trying to retreat without escalating into violence. Smart. They knew they were outgunned. But what interested Alex most was Lorenzo himself, who'd finally reached his son. The crime boss dropped to his knees in the sand, hands on Marco's shoulders, checking him for injuries with the frantic care of any parent. Marco signed something quickly, and Lorenzo actually smiled. A brief, relieved expression that transformed his entire face. Then Lorenzo stood and looked at Sophie. "Thank you," he said simply. Sophie nodded, pulling Eli close. "Are they gone? Are we safe?" Vincent approached Lorenzo, his expression grim. "Boss, we need to move.
Now."
They might come back with reinforcements." "Not might," Lorenzo corrected, his voice hardening.
"Will."
This was the Castellanos. "I'd bet my life on it. Then we need to get you and Marco somewhere secure." Lorenzo looked at Sophie and Eli. "Them too. They're witnesses now. If the Castellanos think she can identify them." "I didn't see their faces clearly," Sophie interjected quickly. "I can't identify anyone." "Well, just forget this happened. You think it works that way?" Lorenzo's voice wasn't unkind, just realistic. "You put yourself between my son and hired kidnappers. You're part of this now, whether you want to be or not." Sophie's stomach dropped. This was exactly what she'd feared, getting pulled into Lorenzo Vitali's world with no way out. "I have to get back to work," she said weakly. "I have a shift tonight." "Call in sick," Vincent said flatly. "We're taking you somewhere safe until we assess the threat level." From his position nearby, Alex captured it all. The crime boss, the protective mother, the terrified children, and the security team preparing to move them all off the beach. Whatever had started as a simple observation mission had just become something far more complicated. And somewhere in the city, the Castellanos were regrouping, planning their next move. The beach day was over. But the real danger was just beginning. The retreat lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Ricky made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his considerably shortened life. "Screw this," he muttered, and lunged for Marco. It was desperation, not strategy. The van was 30 feet away at the pier entrance. If he could grab just one kid and make it to the vehicle, Tony could negotiate from a position of strength. 3 seconds of chaos was all he needed. Vincent moved to intercept, but Ricky was already in motion, closing the distance with the reckless speed of a man with nothing to lose. Sophie saw him coming and reacted on pure instinct. She shoved both boys toward the pier, away from Ricky, away from the beach, toward what she thought was escape, and planted herself in his path. "Run!" she screamed at Marco and Eli. The boys stumbled through the sand toward the wooden pier, Eli crying, Marco's hands signing frantically in panic. They scrambled up the ramp toward the boardwalk level, where tourists scattered at the sight of 2 terrified children. Ricky tried to push past Sophie, but she grabbed his arm with surprising strength, her nails digging into his jacket. "Danny, north side," Ricky shouted. "Cut them off at the pier." Danny abandoned his balloon cart and sprinted toward the pier's opposite entrance, his friendly mask completely gone. His hand went to his waistband, pulling out a knife. Sophie realized her mistake too late. She'd pushed the boys toward the pier, toward the van, toward the trap. She'd sent them running straight into the kidnapper's exit route. "No," she gasped, wrenching free from Ricky and running after Marco and Eli. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she pushed harder than she'd ever pushed in her life. She hit the pier ramp at full speed, taking the steps 2 at a time. On the upper level, Marco and Eli had stopped, frozen. Danny was ahead of them, blocking the boardwalk exit. Behind them, Ricky was climbing the ramp. They were trapped. Sophie reached the top and threw herself in front of both boys, spreading her arms wide. Her chest heaved, her vision blurred with fear and exertion, but her voice was steady. "You want them, you go through me." Danny's eyes flicked between Sophie and the approaching security team. "Lady move. Last chance." "No." Ricky reached the top of the ramp, breathing hard. "We don't have time for this. Grab them, and..." A voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. "Touch any of them, and you don't leave this pier breathing." Lorenzo Vitali stood at the base of the pier, Vincent and Carlos flanking him. 3 more men had materialized from various positions on the beach, forming a semicircle that cut off any escape route. The carefree crime boss from 20 minutes ago was gone. This was the man who controlled Chicago's north side through fear and respect. This was Lorenzo Vitali, unmasked and dangerous. From his elevated position, Alex had the perfect shot. His camera captured everything: Lorenzo's men moving in tactical formation, weapons partially visible, the 2 would-be kidnappers realizing they were outmatched, and Sophie Martinez standing between the children and danger with nothing but courage. This was gold. Federal prosecutors would salivate over these images, clear evidence of Lorenzo's organization operating in public, armed security, implied violence. Combined with the kidnapping attempt, it was enough to warrant immediate surveillance expansion, maybe even RICO charges. But Alex's finger hesitated on the shutter button as he watched what happened next. Lorenzo climbed the pier ramp slowly, deliberately. Each step was measured, controlled. His men moved with him, weapons now visible, no longer bothering with concealment. "Sophie," Lorenzo said calmly, not taking his eyes off Ricky and Danny. "Take the boys behind me." Sophie didn't move. "How do I know you won't?" "Because I'm asking you to trust me." Lorenzo's voice softened just slightly. "Please." Something in his tone made Sophie believe him. She backed up slowly, keeping Marco and Eli close, and moved behind Lorenzo's protective line. The moment she was clear, Lorenzo's expression changed. "Vincent, secure them. Non-lethally, if possible. I want to know who sent them." Vincent moved forward with Carlos, and suddenly the pier became a demonstration of professional violence. It took less than 10 seconds. Danny's knife clattered to the wooden boards. Ricky tried to run and made it 3 steps before Carlos tackled him. No shots fired.
No screaming.
Just efficient, brutal competence. Danny struggled as Vincent zip-tied his hands. You're making a mistake, Vitali. Tony Castellano. I know exactly who sent you, Lorenzo interrupted. And I know exactly what message to send back. He turned to Michael, who'd been positioning the black SUV. Take these 2 to the warehouse. I'll deal with them later. Right now, I need to make sure everyone else is safe. Alex captured it all through his lens. The takedown, the zip ties, Lorenzo giving orders like a general on a battlefield. This was exactly what the FBI needed, Lorenzo Vitali directing criminal activity in broad daylight. But as Alex zoomed in on Lorenzo's face, something gave him pause. The crime boss was checking on his son, hands gentle on Marco's shoulders, signing something Alex couldn't read. Marco signed back, pointing at Sophie, and Lorenzo looked at her with an expression that wasn't cold calculation or criminal strategy. It was gratitude. Genuine human gratitude. Alex's training told him to keep shooting, to document everything, to think about convictions and sentences, and taking down organized crime. But 12 years in the FBI had also taught him that the world wasn't always black and white. He kept his camera raised and kept shooting, but for the first time in his career, he wasn't entirely sure what he was witnessing, a crime or a rescue. Sophie's legs finally gave out, and she sat down hard on the pier boards. Eli collapsed into her arms, sobbing. Marco stood nearby, his small hand finding Sophie's shoulder, signing. Thank you. You saved us. Lorenzo crouched beside them. Are you hurt? Either of you? Sophie shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. My men are clearing the area. We'll take you somewhere safe, get you checked out, make sure. Why? Sophie interrupted, her voice hoarse. Why did they want him? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Because I have enemies. Because I made choices that painted targets on my family. Because in my world, an 8-year-old boy is leverage. He looked down at Marco, and Sophie saw something crack in his armored expression. I'm sorry you got caught in this, Lorenzo continued. You and your son. You shouldn't have to be afraid, because you were kind to mine. Sophie looked at this man, this mafia boss with blood on his hands and genuine love for his child, and felt the weight of the choice ahead of her. She could walk away right now, take Eli and disappear, change their names, move to another state, pretend this day never happened. Or she could stay and help the boy, who desperately needed someone who understood his language. Marco's hand was still on her shoulder, his eyes pleading. Sophie had never been good at walking away from kids who needed her. What happens now? She asked quietly. Lorenzo stood, offering his hand to help her up. Now we make sure you're both safe. Then we talk about what comes next. Sophie took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Behind them, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. And somewhere above them, a tourist with a camera captured the moment Sophie Martinez stepped fully into Lorenzo Vitali's world. There was no going back now. The private beach cabana was 30 yards from where the chaos had unfolded, tucked behind swaying palms and white curtains that billowed in the lake breeze. Lorenzo's men had cleared it within minutes. The original renters compensated generously for their inconvenience. No questions asked. Sophie sat on a wicker chair, Eli curled against her side, half asleep from emotional exhaustion. Marco sat across from them, wrapped in a towel despite the heat, his eyes tracking his father's movements, like a small animal watching for predators. Lorenzo stood near the entrance, speaking in low tones with Vincent. The sirens had stopped. Chicago PD had arrived, taken statements from confused beachgoers, and left when they found no victims, no weapons, and no one willing to press charges. Money and influence had smoothed things over. It always did. Lorenzo dismissed Vincent with a nod and turned to Sophie. His expression was unreadable. The boys need water, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Vincent will take them to get drinks. We should talk. Sophie's arms tightened around Eli. He stays with me. Mom, I'm thirsty, Eli mumbled. Marcos signed something, and Lorenzo translated. He says he'll make sure your son is safe. He promises. Sophie looked at Marco, this 8-year-old boy who just survived a kidnapping attempt and was now trying to comfort her son. Her chest ached. Okay, she whispered. Eli, stay with Marco and the big man. I'll be right here. Eli rubbed his eyes and stood, taking Marco's outstretched hand. The two boys followed Vincent out of the cabana, leaving Sophie alone with Lorenzo Vitali. The silence stretched for a long moment. Lorenzo pulled up a chair and sat, maintaining distance, professional, not threatening. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she expected. Tell me the truth. All of it. Why did you really approach my son? Sophie met his eyes. I saw him signing. I'm a teacher, was a teacher. I couldn't walk past a child who looked lonely. That's not all of it. Lorenzo leaned forward slightly. You recognized him. I saw it in your face when you looked at him. You've seen him before. Sophie's hands twisted in her lap. There was no point in lying now.
Yes.
I taught him 3 years ago, for about 3 months, at Brightside Learning Center. Lorenzo's expression shifted, surprise, then understanding. You worked there. Until it closed, Sophie's voice was soft. Your wife arranged everything, didn't she? The funding, the programs, the specialized equipment. She never said it was for Marco specifically, but I knew. I saw how she watched him during her visits. Lorenzo's jaw tightened at the mention of Maria, but he didn't look away. She believed every child deserved a chance to communicate, not just Marco. She would have funded that center even if our son wasn't enrolled. I know. That's the kind of person she was. You knew her? Not well, but enough to know she was kind. Genuine. Sophie paused. I'm sorry for your loss. Lorenzo stood abruptly and walked to the cabana entrance, his back to Sophie. For a moment, she thought he might leave, but he just stared out at the water where families were packing up their beach gear, ready to go home to safe, normal lives. When Marco stopped talking, Lorenzo said finally, I didn't know what to do. The therapist said give him time, give him space. They said he'd speak when he was ready. But months passed, and he just disappeared further inside himself. He turned back to Sophie. Then today, I watched a stranger crouch down and have a full conversation with my son. I watched him laugh for the first time since his mother died. And I realized I've been failing him. You haven't failed him, Sophie said gently. You just don't speak his language yet. That doesn't mean you don't love him. He thinks I don't understand him. Then learn. It's not too late. Lorenzo studied her face, searching for deception, and finding none. Vincent thought you were a plant. Someone sent to get close to Marco, to use him against me. I'm not. I know. Lorenzo sat back down, and this time his posture was less guarded. Which makes this complicated. You saved my son today. You put yourself between him and danger without hesitation. That kind of loyalty can't be bought. I didn't do it for loyalty. I did it because he's a child. Most people would have run.
Sophie thought about that.
Maybe. But I've spent years working with kids that the world overlooks. Kids who communicate differently, who see the world differently. Marco is special. He deserves someone who sees that. He needs a teacher, Lorenzo said slowly, the words forming into a decision as he spoke. Someone who understands him. Someone who can help him find his voice again, whether that's spoken or signed. Sophie's heart began to race. Mr. Vitali. Lorenzo. Lorenzo, she corrected. I work at a diner. I barely make rent. I'm not qualified to. You're the most qualified person I've met. Lorenzo's voice was firm. You understand Marco in ways I don't. You can teach him, help him process what happened to his mother. And maybe you can teach me how to communicate with my son. This isn't a good idea. Sophie shook her head. What happened today? Those men came after him because of who you are. Your world is dangerous. Which is exactly why you need protection. You and Eli both. Lorenzo's expression hardened. The Castellanos know you interfered. They saw you protect Marco. In their eyes, That makes you my ally. Whether you work for me or not, you're already a target. The truth of his words settled over Sophie like a weight. I can't, she started, but the words died in her throat. Because she was thinking about Marco's hopeful face, his desperate need for someone who understood him. She was thinking about Eli, who'd bonded with Marco instantly. And she was thinking about the rent she couldn't pay, the bills piling up, the constant fear of eviction. I'll pay you well, Lorenzo continued. Private tutoring, 3 times a week. You and Eli will have security when you need it. Full-time if necessary. I need to think about it. Fair enough, Lorenzo stood. But think quickly. I need to know you're safe, regardless of your decision. Tonight, you'll stay at one of my properties. You and Eli. No negotiation on that point. 2 blocks away, Alex Carter sat in his rental car, laptop open, reviewing the day's photographs. His screen showed image after image of Sophie Martinez integrated into Lorenzo's security perimeter. Sophie standing with Lorenzo. Sophie behind his protective line. Sophie being escorted to a private cabana while Lorenzo's men stood guard.
She was inside now.
Fully inside. Alex pulled up her background file again. Clean record. No mob connections. Single mother struggling to make ends meet. But now she was sitting in a private cabana with Lorenzo Vitali, and Alex had watched the crime boss look at her with something that wasn't suspicion or calculation. It was trust. This just got complicated, Alex muttered, flagging the photos for his handler. Sophie Martinez was either the world's unluckiest teacher, or she was about to become the FBI's most valuable asset for getting close to Lorenzo Vitali. Either way, her life had just changed forever. And Alex would be watching every step she took. The moon was rising over Lake Michigan when Marco and Eli returned to the cabana, Vincent trailing behind with juice boxes and granola bars. Both boys looked steadier, color returning to their faces. Marco immediately went to his father, signing rapidly. Lorenzo watched his son's hands, catching maybe 1 word in 5, his frustration visible. He's asking if Sophie is staying, Vincent translated quietly. He's worried she'll leave. Lorenzo looked at Sophie, then back at his son. He crouched to Marco's level and tried to sign something, clumsy, imprecise, but Marco's eyes widened with surprise and hope. We're asking her, Lorenzo had signed. She's thinking. It wasn't perfect. His hand shapes were wrong, his movements stiff. But he tried. For the first time in 18 months, he tried to speak his son's language. Marco threw his arms around Lorenzo's neck. Sophie watched Lorenzo's face transform, the hardened crime boss dissolving into just a father holding his child. His eyes closed, arms wrapping protectively around Marco, and for a moment Sophie saw the man Maria Vitali must have fallen in love with. When Marco finally pulled back, he turned to Sophie and signed, "Please don't go. Please help my dad understand me." Eli tugged on Sophie's sleeve. "Mom, can we help them? Marco's nice. And his dad seems nice too." Nice wasn't the word Sophie would use for Lorenzo Vitali. But watching him attempt sign language with fumbling determination, seeing the desperate hope in Marco's eyes, she felt her resistance crumbling. Lorenzo stood, composing himself. "Vincent, give us a few minutes." Vincent nodded and stepped outside with the boys, leaving Sophie and Lorenzo alone again. Lorenzo walked to a small bar cart in the corner and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. He held up the bottle questioningly to Sophie, who shook her head. "I don't make speeches," Lorenzo said, taking a sip. "I don't do apologies. In my line of work, showing weakness gets you killed." "Then don't," Sophie said simply. Lorenzo turned to face her. "But I'm going to say this once, and I need you to believe it.
Thank you for what you did today.
For seeing my son, when most people look right through him. For putting yourself in danger to protect him. I will never forget that." The words came out rough, unpracticed. Sophie realized he was telling the truth. He didn't do this. Didn't open up, didn't show gratitude, didn't let his guard down. "Most people would have run," he continued. "Vincent, Carlos, my entire security team, they're paid to protect Marco.
But you?
You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. You did it anyway. I told you he's a child. I couldn't. You could have, Lorenzo interrupted. Plenty of people would have. But you didn't. That says something about who you are. He set down his glass and moved closer, his voice dropping. I'm offering you a position. Private tutor for Marco, 3 times a week to start. Maybe more if it goes well. I'll pay you $3,000 a week. 3,000. Sophie's voice cracked. She made that in a month at the diner. It's not charity. You'll earn it. Marco needs intensive work, sign language development, emotional processing, reintegration skills. You'll be helping him navigate grief. I don't know how to handle. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. And you'll teach me. I want to learn to communicate with my son properly. No more guessing. No more frustrated silences. Sophie's mind raced. 3,000 a week was life-changing money. It was Eli's college fund. It was security, stability, the ability to breathe without constantly calculating which bill to pay first. But it was also stepping into Lorenzo Vitali's world. The world that had nearly cost Marco and Eli their lives today. What about safety? She asked. The men who tried to take them today will be handled, Lorenzo said, his voice turning cold. The Castellanos made their move. Now I make mine. By tomorrow morning, they'll understand that threatening my family has consequences. The casual way he said it made Sophie's stomach turn. She knew what consequences meant in Lorenzo's world. I need guarantees, Sophie said, her voice steady despite her fear. Protection for Eli and me. Real protection, not just when it's convenient.
Done.
Vincent will coordinate a security detail. And I need boundaries, Sophie stood, meeting Lorenzo's eyes. I'll teach Marco. I'll help you learn to communicate with him. But Eli and I aren't property. We're not pawns in whatever wars you fight. We get treated with respect, or this doesn't work. Something flickered across Lorenzo's face. Surprise, maybe respect. Fair terms. And if I ever feel like Eli is in danger because of this arrangement, I walk away. No arguments, no threats. We leave, and you let us go. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. Sophie could see him calculating, weighing the risk of giving someone that much control. Finally, he extended his hand. You have my word. You're not prisoners. He paused, searching for the right word. Family. Family gets protected, not controlled. Sophie looked at his outstretched hand. This was the moment. The choice that would change everything. She thought about Marco's hopeful face. About Eli's instant friendship with him. About the pile of past due notices on her kitchen counter and the worn-out car that barely started most mornings. She thought about the risk, the danger, the world she'd be stepping into. Then she thought about a little boy who'd lost his mother and couldn't find his voice, and a father who loved him but couldn't understand him. Sophie took Lorenzo's hand and shook it firmly. Okay, she said. I'll do it. But I'm doing this for Marco, not for you. I know, Lorenzo said, and for the first time, he smiled. Small, but genuine. That's exactly why I trust you. Outside the cabana, Marco was teaching Eli basic signs while Vincent watched with barely concealed amusement. When Sophie and Lorenzo emerged, Marco looked up anxiously. Sophie crouched down and signed. I'm going to be your teacher. We're going to help your dad understand you. Marco's face split into the widest smile Sophie had seen yet. He signed back. Really? You promise? I promise. Marco launched himself at her, hugging her tight. Over his shoulder, Sophie saw Lorenzo watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Or perhaps just a father realizing that healing was finally possible. As Vincent drove them to Lorenzo's safe house, a luxury townhome in Lincoln Park that made Sophie's apartment look like a cardboard box, she stared out the window at Chicago's glittering skyline. She'd made her choice. Now she'd have to live with the consequences. The warehouse on the south side smelled like rust and old blood. Ricky and Danny Castellano knelt on the concrete floor, hands still zip-tied, surrounded by Lorenzo's men. Vincent stood behind them, arms crossed, expression neutral. This was business, nothing personal. Lorenzo entered through the loading dock door, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He'd changed from his beach clothes into a dark suit, the uniform of a man conducting serious affairs. "Who gave the order?" Lorenzo asked calmly, circling the brothers like a shark. Ricky kept his mouth shut. Danny looked ready to vomit. "Tony," Danny whispered. "Tony said it was time to make a move. Said you were distracted, vulnerable." "Tony Castellano thinks I'm vulnerable?" Lorenzo's voice was ice. Interesting assessment. He crouched in front of Ricky, who finally met his eyes with defiant hatred. "You came after my son," Lorenzo said softly. "In broad daylight. In public. With witnesses everywhere. That's not ambition. That's stupidity." "Tony will come for you," Ricky spat. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Lorenzo stood and nodded to Vincent. "Send them back to Tony. Make sure he understands the message." Vincent smiled without humor. "Both of them?"
"Both of them. Alive."
"I want Tony to see what happens when you threaten a Vitali." 20 minutes later, Ricky and Danny were dumped on Tony Castellano's doorstep, beaten, broken, but breathing. The message was clear. "I could have killed them, but I'm letting you see what mercy looks like. Don't make me show you what happens when mercy runs out." By dawn, word had spread through Chicago's underworld. Lorenzo Vitali wasn't soft. He wasn't distracted. He was protecting his family with the same ruthless efficiency he'd always shown. The Castellanos wouldn't be a problem anymore. Tony was smart enough to know when he'd lost. 300 miles away in the FBI's Chicago field office, Alex Carter sat across from his supervisor, SAC Patricia Morrison, watching her review his photographs on a large monitor. "This is Sophie Martinez?" Morrison asked, zooming in on a photo of Sophie shielding the boys on the pier. "Former special ed teacher. Currently working at Jerry's Diner." No priors, no connections. Alex leaned back in his chair. Until yesterday, when she became Lorenzo Vitali's newest employee. Morrison clicked through more images. Sophie in the cabana with Lorenzo. Sophie leaving with a security detail. Sophie being driven to a Lincoln Park townhome owned by one of Lorenzo's shell companies. She's living in his property now. As of last night. Her and her son. Full security detail. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "What's the relationship?" "She's teaching his son. The kid's mute, uses sign language. She knows how to communicate with him." Alex pulled up his notes. "But here's the interesting part. She worked at Brightside Learning Center 3 years ago. That center was funded by Maria Vitali, Lorenzo's late wife. So, this isn't random."
"No."
"She taught Marco before. She recognized him at the beach." Morrison was quiet for a moment, processing. "Does Vitali know she recognized him?" "I believe so. They had a long conversation in the cabana after the incident, and she still took the job. $3,000 a week, apparently. Plus protection for her and her son." Morrison whistled low. "That's serious money for a part-time tutor." "What's Vitali really buying?" "Loyalty," Alex said. "She saved his son's life yesterday. Put herself between Marco and armed kidnappers. Vitali's not just hiring a teacher. He's bringing her into the fold." Morrison stared at Sophie's photo, thinking. She's a civilian. No training, no connections, but now she's inside Vitali's inner circle. That makes her either a witness or a liability. Or an asset, Alex suggested carefully. Morrison's head snapped up. "You want to recruit her?" "I'm saying she has access we don't. She's in his home, teaching his son, earning his trust. If we approached her carefully." "Absolutely not," Morrison's voice was sharp. "She is a child. We're not putting a civilian with a 7-year-old in the middle of a RICO investigation. That's not how we operate." "Then what do we do? Just watch her?" "That's exactly what we do. Document everything. If Sophie Martinez commits a crime or becomes complicit in Vitali's operations, we'll have evidence. If she remains clean, she walks. But we don't recruit her, and we don't put her in danger." Alex nodded, though part of him disagreed. Sophie had stumbled into something massive, and whether she knew it or not, She was already in danger. Keep surveillance active, Morrison continued. I want to know everyone she talks to, everywhere she goes. If Vitali's bringing her this close, there's a reason beyond teaching sign language. 4 days later, Sophie sat in Lorenzo's library, an elegant room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows, watching Marco sign about his mother. She used to read to me here. Marco's hands moved slowly, carefully. Every night before bed. She did all the voices. Sophie signed back. What was your favorite story? Where the wild things are. She said I was Max, the boy who wasn't afraid of monsters.
You're still that boy, Sophie signed. Still brave.
Behind them, Lorenzo sat in an armchair, following the conversation with intense concentration. Sophie had given him a basic sign language guide, and he'd been studying it every night, his hands practicing shapes and movements whenever he had a spare moment. What are you saying? Lorenzo asked, frustrated by his inability to follow the rapid exchange. Sophie turned to him. He's talking about Maria, about how she used to read to him. Lorenzo's expression softened with grief and love. She had a gift for voices. She could make characters come alive. Marco watched his father's face, then slowly signed. Tell him I miss her. Tell him I'm sorry I can't say it out loud. Sophie's throat tightened. Marco, you can tell him yourself. He'll understand. Marco hesitated, then turned to his father and signed carefully. I miss Mom.
I'm sorry.
Lorenzo didn't catch every sign, but he caught enough. His eyes welled, and he moved from his chair to kneel in front of his son. You have nothing to be sorry for, Lorenzo said, his voice rough. He attempted to sign as he spoke. I miss her too. Every day. His signs were clumsy, imperfect, but Marco understood. The boy threw his arms around his father's neck, and for the first time since the accident, Lorenzo felt like they were actually communicating, not just existing in parallel silence. Sophie watched them, Eli playing quietly with blocks nearby, and felt the weight of what she'd stepped into. This wasn't just tutoring. This was rebuilding a shattered family, one sign at a time. In the corner, a security camera recorded everything, standard procedure for Lorenzo's properties. And 3 blocks away, in an unmarked van, Alex Carter monitored the feed his tech team had hacked into, watching a crime boss learn to talk to his son while a former teacher helped them heal. It was the most human thing Alex had ever seen Lorenzo Vitali do. It was also the most complicated surveillance operation he'd ever run. Because somewhere between the criminal and the father, between the investigation and the truth, Alex was starting to see Lorenzo Vitali as something he'd never expected. A person. And that changed everything. 3 weeks had passed since the beach. Sophie arrived at Lorenzo's estate every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 o'clock sharp. The routine had become comfortable. Vincent would greet her at the gate. Marco would be waiting in whatever room they'd chosen for that day's lesson, and Lorenzo would observe from a respectful distance, his sign language improving with each session. Today they were in the garden. It was Sophie's idea. Marco had been getting restless indoors, his attention drifting toward the windows. Children needed space to breathe, to move, to feel the world around them while they processed difficult emotions. The garden was magnificent. Manicured hedges, stone pathways, a fountain that bubbled softly in the center. Maria's garden, Vincent had mentioned quietly. She designed it herself. Sophie spread a blanket under a large oak tree while Eli and Marco collected smooth stones from around the fountain. The boys had become inseparable over the past weeks, Eli learning basic signs, Marco learning to be a kid again instead of a ghost in his own home. Okay, guys, Sophie signed and spoke simultaneously. Today we're going to talk about feelings. The hard ones. Marco's hands stilled on the stone he was holding. He looked at Sophie warily. I know it's not fun, Sophie continued gently, but feelings are like these stones. If we keep them in our pockets, they get heavy. Sometimes we need to take them out and look at them. She pulled out a set of cards she'd made, each one with a different emotion drawn in simple illustrations. Happy, sad, angry, scared, confused, lonely. Pick the feeling you've had the most this week, she signed. Eli immediately grabbed happy. Marco's hand hovered over the cards, then slowly selected sad and angry, 2 cards. Sophie nodded. You can feel more than one thing at the same time. That's okay. That's normal. Why am I angry? Marco signed. I shouldn't be angry at her. At who? Sophie asked, though she already knew.
Mom.
Marco's hands moved jerkily, frustration in every gesture. She left me. She promised she'd always be here, and she left. Sophie's chest tightened. This was the breakthrough they'd been building toward, the locked door Marco had been guarding for 18 months. She didn't choose to leave. Sophie signed carefully. The accident wasn't her choice. But she's still gone. Tears welled in Marco's eyes. And Dad won't talk about her. He looks sad when I try. So I stopped trying. I kept it all inside, and now I can't get it out. That's why you stopped talking, Sophie signed, understanding clicking into place. Not because you couldn't, because the words hurt too much. Marco nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. 30 feet away, Lorenzo stood behind a marble column, watching. He'd been there the whole time, hidden, observing as Sophie coaxed his son toward healing. Vincent stood beside him, silent. He's talking about Maria, Vincent whispered. I can tell by his face. Lorenzo's hands clenched at his sides. He'd avoided these conversations, changed the subject when Marco's hands started forming Maria's name. He'd thought he was protecting his son from pain. He'd been protecting himself. Sophie signed to Marco. Your dad loved your mom so much that losing her broke something in him. He's not sad because of you. He's sad because he misses her. Just like you do. Then why won't he talk about her? Because sometimes grown-ups think staying strong means staying quiet. But that's not true. Being strong means feeling the hard things and talking about them anyway. Marco wiped his eyes. I want to tell him things. Things I remember about her. But I don't know if he wants to hear them. He does, a voice said. Marco's head whipped around. Lorenzo stepped out from behind the column, his face drawn but open. He walked slowly to the blanket and sat down, his expensive suit jacket wrinkling on the grass. I want to hear everything, Lorenzo said, attempting to sign as he spoke. His hands were still clumsy, but he was trying.
Please. Tell me.
Marco stared at his father, surprised and uncertain. Then slowly his hands began to move. I remember how she smelled like lavender. How she sang off-key in the car. How she made pancakes shaped like animals on Sundays. Lorenzo's eyes glistened, but he kept watching his son's hands, following every sign. I remember the day of the accident, Marco continued, his signing becoming more urgent. She was taking me to buy new shoes. I was complaining because I wanted to stay home and play games. I was mean to her that morning. And then the truck hit us, and she... His hands froze, shaking. It wasn't your fault, Lorenzo said firmly, reaching out to still Marco's trembling hands with his own. Do you hear me? None of it was your fault. But I was mean to her. The last thing I said. She knew you loved her, Lorenzo interrupted, his voice breaking. Marco, listen to me. Your mother knew. She always knew. One grumpy morning didn't change 18 years of love. Marco's face crumpled. I can't remember the sound of her voice anymore. I try, but it's fading and I'm scared I'll forget her completely. Lorenzo pulled his son into his arms, holding him tight while Marco sobbed, the first real tears he'd shed since the funeral. You won't forget her, Lorenzo whispered into Marco's hair. I promise. We'll remember her together. Every day, every story, every memory. We'll keep her alive by talking about her. Sophie moved back, giving them space. Eli came to her side, watching with wide eyes as Marco cried against his father's shoulder and Lorenzo's tears fell silently into his son's dark hair. Is Marco okay?
Eli whispered.
He's better than okay, Sophie whispered back. He's healing. For long minutes, Father and son held each other in the garden Maria had designed, the fountain bubbling softly, the oak tree's shadow stretching across the grass. When Marco finally pulled back, his face was red and puffy, but something had shifted. The tightness around his eyes was gone. The weight he'd been carrying had lightened. He signed to his father. "Can you tell me stories about her? About before I was born? About when you first met?" Lorenzo smiled through his tears. "I can tell you 1,000 stories." He attempted to sign every day. "I promise." Marco hugged him again, and this time it wasn't desperate grief, it was connection. Understanding. The first real conversation they'd had in 18 months. Sophie watched them, her own eyes burning. This was why she'd become a teacher. These moments, when broken things started to mend, when silence transformed into language, when families found their way back to each other. In the oak tree above them, a camera hidden in the branches captured everything: the tears, the embrace, the raw emotion. And in the van 3 blocks away, Alex Carter watched his monitor and felt like an intruder in something sacred. He'd been building a case against Lorenzo Vitali for months. He'd documented crimes, connections, evidence of racketeering and conspiracy. But watching this, a father and son learning to communicate through grief, Alex wasn't sure what he was witnessing anymore. Was this the private life of a criminal? Or just a man trying to save his family? The lines were blurring. And Alex was no longer certain which side of them Sophie Martinez stood on. The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, when Alex Carter finally left his surveillance position and drove to the federal building downtown. SAC Patricia Morrison was waiting in her office, the door already open. "Tell me you have something," she said without preamble. Alex dropped a USB drive on her desk and pulled up a chair. 3 weeks of footage. Sophie Martinez has been inside Lorenzo's estate 12 times. She's teaching the kid, helping Vitali learn sign language, facilitating emotional breakthroughs that look more like family therapy than tutoring. Morrison plugged in the drive and pulled up the footage on her monitor. She watched silently as the garden scene played out. Marco crying, Lorenzo holding his son, Sophie orchestrating healing with quiet competence. "This is," Morrison trailed off, searching for words. "This isn't what I expected." "It's not what any of us expected." Alex leaned back, exhausted. "She's not involved in his criminal operations. She's not laundering money, carrying messages, or facilitating deals. She's just teaching his son. And creating a vulnerability." Morrison zoomed in on Lorenzo's face, capturing the raw emotion. "Look at him. That's not the man who controls Chicago's North Side through fear. That's a father who'd do anything for his child." "Which makes Sophie Martinez leverage," Alex said quietly. "The Castellanos already tried to use Marco against him. Now Vitali's bringing in an outsider, giving her access to his home, his son, his private life. Every enemy he has is watching." Morrison closed the file and studied Alex's face. "You sound concerned. For her. She's a civilian with a kid. She stumbled into this trying to be kind, and now she's in the crosshairs whether she realizes it or not. That's not our problem. Our job is to build a case against Vitali, not protect his employees." Morrison's voice was firm, but not unkind. "But you're right that she's a weakness. If we ever need leverage against him, Sophie Martinez is it." Alex nodded, though something in his chest tightened at the thought. He'd spent 3 weeks watching Sophie teach a traumatized boy, watching her integrate her own son into their fragile healing, watching her navigate Lorenzo's dangerous world with surprising grace. She wasn't calculating. She wasn't playing an angle. She was just trying to help a kid. "Keep watching," Morrison said. "Document everything. The moment she crosses a legal line, we move." Alex took the USB drive and left, but as he walked to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all missing something important. Sophie Martinez wasn't Lorenzo's weakness. She might be the only thing holding his humanity together. Lorenzo Vitali rarely drove himself anywhere. It was inefficient, exposed him unnecessarily, and sent the wrong message to his organization. Lorenzo Vitali didn't chauffeur people. People chauffeured him. But tonight, as Sophie gathered her things and prepared to call a rideshare home, Lorenzo took his keys from Vincent's startled hand. "I'll drive you," he said simply. Sophie blinked. "That's not necessary. Vincent can." "I wanna." Lorenzo's tone left no room for argument, but it wasn't harsh. "You've given my son something I couldn't. Let me give you a safe ride home." 20 minutes later, Lorenzo's black Mercedes glided through Chicago's streets while Marco and Eli dozed in the back seat, exhausted from the emotional afternoon. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past. "He talked about her," Lorenzo said quietly, his eyes on the road. "Really talked. For the first time since the funeral." "He needed permission," Sophie replied. "He thought talking about Maria hurt you, so he kept it inside. Once he knew you wanted to hear the memories, he could finally share them. I should have realized that myself. You were grieving too. Sometimes we're too close to our own pain to see clearly." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. "Vincent thinks I'm making a mistake. Bringing you this close, letting you see how things really are. He says it makes us vulnerable." Sophie's hands tightened in her lap. "Is he right?" "Probably." Lorenzo's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But I don't care. Marco needs you. I need you. That's worth the risk." They pulled up to Sophie's apartment building, a modest complex with peeling paint and broken porch lights. Lorenzo stared at it for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket. "This is for you," he said, handing her an envelope. Sophie opened it and found a check for $12,000 for weeks of work. "Lorenzo, I can't." "You can. You have." Marco's talking again, opening up, healing. "That's worth more than any number I could write." He paused. "There's also a key card in there. To the townhouse in Lincoln Park where you stayed the first night. It's yours now. You and Eli. Move in this week." "I can't accept. You're part of this now, Sophie. Whether you meant to be or not." Lorenzo's voice was gentle but serious. "The Castellanos know your face. Others will too. That apartment isn't safe. The townhouse is secured, monitored, protected. Please." Sophie looked at the keycard, feeling the weight of what it represented. She wasn't just teaching Marco anymore. She was inside Lorenzo Vitali's world, protected, provided for, but also watched. Trapped or saved. She wasn't sure anymore. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll move." Lorenzo nodded, something like relief crossing his face. "Vincent will help you pack tomorrow." As Sophie gathered sleeping Eli from the back seat, Marco stirred and signed sleepily. "See you Friday?" "See you Friday," Sophie signed back, smiling. Lorenzo watched her carry her son inside, waiting until she'd disappeared into the building before driving away. In his rearview mirror, he caught Vincent's car pulling up, security he'd assigned without telling Sophie. She'd need protection now, whether she wanted it or not. 3 blocks away, Alex Carter sat in his surveillance van, uploading the evening's footage. Lorenzo Vitali had driven Sophie Martinez home personally, had given her a place to live in one of his protected properties, had assigned her security detail. She wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was family. Morrison would want to know immediately. This level of trust, this kind of integration, it was unprecedented. Sophie Martinez had become Lorenzo Vitali's inner circle in 3 weeks. Alex typed his report, flagged it urgent, and hit send. Then he pulled up the garden footage one more time and watched Marco cry in his father's arms while Sophie made healing possible. "What are you, Sophie Martinez?" Alex whispered to the screen. "And which side of this are you really on?" Above the city, stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere, the Castellanos were licking their wounds. The FBI was building its case. Lorenzo was protecting his family. And Sophie Martinez, former teacher, single mother, accidental insider, was trying to figure out how her life had changed so completely in 3 short weeks. The beach day felt like a lifetime ago. The laughter that started it all had transformed into something more complex. Bonds forged in danger, trust built through trauma, and the fragile hope that broken families could heal. But in Lorenzo's world, hope always came with a price. And Sophie was about to learn that some debts could never be fully repaid. The story that began with a chance meeting and a child's laugh had evolved into something far more dangerous. And it was only just beginning.